Hello, this is the Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, Chapter 13, Unfortunate Conclusions. With his mouth shut tight and his feet moving as fast as thoughts could make them go, Milo ran all the way back to the car. There was a great excitement when he arrived as Talk raced happily down the road to greet him. The humbug personally accepted all congratulations from the crowd. "Where is the sound?" someone hastily scribbled on the blackboard, and they all waited anxiously for the reply. Milo caught his breath, picked up the chalk, and explained simply, "It's on the tip of my tongue." Several people excitedly threw hats into the air, some shouted at what would have been a loud hurrah, and the rest pushed the heavy cannon into place. They aimed it directly at the thickest part of the fortress wall and packed it full of gunpowder. Milo stood on tiptoe, leaning over into the cannon's mouth, and parted his lips. The small sound dropped silently to the bottom, and everything was ready. In another moment, a fuse was lit and sputtering. "I do hope no one gets hurt," thought Milo, and before he had time to think it again, an immense cloud of gray and white smoke leapt from the gun, and along with it, so softly that it was hardly even heard, came the sound of "but." It flew toward the wall for several seconds in a high, lazy arc, and then struck, ever so lightly, just to the right of the big door. For an instant, there was an ominous stillness, quieter and more silent than ever before, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Then, almost immediately, there was a blasting and a roaring and a thunderous crash, followed by a crushing and shattering and bursting crash, as if every stone in the fortress came toppling to the ground and the vaults burst open, spilling the sounds of history into the wind. Every sound that had ever been uttered or made, from way back to when there were none, to way up to when there were too many, came hurtling out of the debris in a way that sounded as though everyone in the world were laughing and whistling and shouting and crying and singing, whispering, humming, screaming, coughing and sneezing all at the same time. There were bits of old speeches floating about, as well as recited lessons and gunshots from old wars and babies' cries and automobile horns and waterfalls and electric fans and galloping horses and a great deal of everything else. For a while there was total and deafening confusion, and then, almost as quickly as they'd come, all the old sounds disappeared over the hill in search of their new freedom. And things were normal again. The people quickly went about their busy, talkative business, and as the smoke and dust from the cannon cleared, only Milo and Talk and the humbug noticed the soundkeeper sitting disconsolately on a pile of rubble. I'm terribly sorry," said Milo sympathetically as the three of them went to console her.
"But we had to do it,"
added Talk, sniffing around the ruins.
"Oh, what a terrible mess,"
observed the humbug with his knack for saying exactly the wrong thing. The soundkeeper looked around with an expression of unrelieved sadness on her unhappy face. "It will take years to collect all of those sounds again," she sobbed, "and even longer to put them back in proper order. It's all my fault. You can't improve sound by only having silence. The problem is to use each at the proper time." As she spoke, the familiar and unmistakable of the din's heavy footsteps could be heard plodding over the hill. And when he finally appeared, he was dragging an incredibly large sack behind him.
Can anyone use these sounds?
He puffed, mopping his own forehead. They all came over the hill at once, and none of them are awful enough for me. The sound keeper peered into the sack, and there were all the sounds, which had just burst from the vaults. How nice of you to return them, she cried happily. You and the doctor must come by for an evening of beautiful music when my fortress is repaired. The thought of beautiful music so terrified the din that he excused himself immediately and dashed off the road in a great panic. Oh my, I hope I haven't offended him, she said with some concern.
He only likes unpleasant sounds,
volunteered Talk. Ah, yes, she sighed. I keep forgetting that many people do. But I suppose they are necessary, for you never really know how pleasant one is unless you knew how unpleasant it isn't. She paused for a moment, then continued. If only Rhyme and Reason were here, I'm sure things would improve. That's why we're on a journey to rescue them. What a long, hard journey that will be. You'll need some nourishment, she cried, handing Milo a small brown paper package, neatly wrapped and tied with a string. Now, do remember they are not for eating. They are for listening, because you'll often be hungry for sounds as well as food. Here are street noises at night, train whistles from a long way off, some dry leaves burning, busy department stores crunching toast, creaking bed springs, and of course, all kinds of laughter. There's a little of each, and in far-off lonely places, I think you'll be glad to have them. I'm sure we will, replied Milo gratefully. Just take this road to the sea and turn left, she told them. You'll soon be in Digitopolis. Almost before she finished, they had said goodbye and left the valley behind them. The shoreline was peaceful and flat, and the calm sea bumped it playfully along the sandy beach. In the distance, a beautiful island covered with palm trees and flowers beckoned invitingly from the sparkling water.
Nothing can possibly go wrong now,
cried the humbug happily, and as soon as he'd said it, he leapt from the car as if struck by a pin and sailed all the way to the little island.
And we'll have plenty of time,
answered Talk, who hadn't noticed that the bug was missing, and he too suddenly leapt into the air and disappeared. It certainly couldn't be a nicer day, agreed Milo, who was too busy looking at the road to see that the others had gone, and in a split second, he was gone too. He landed next to Talk and the terrified humbug on the tiny island, which now looked like a completely different island. Instead of palms and flowers, there were only rocks and twisted stumps of long dead trees. It certainly didn't seem like the same place they had seen from the road. Pardon me, said Milo to the first man who happened by. Can you tell me where I am? Pardon me, replied the man. Can you tell me who I am? The man was dressed in a shaggy tweed jacket and knickers with long woolen stockings and a cap that had a peak both in the front and the back, and seemed as confused as anyone could be. You must know who you are, said Milo impatiently.
You must know who you are,
he replied with equal annoyance.
Or you must know where you are.
Oh, dear, this is going to be difficult, Milo whispered to Talk. I wonder if we can help him. They conferred for a few minutes, and finally the bug looked up and said,
Can you describe yourself?
Indeed, yes, the man replied happily. I'm as tall as can be, and he grew straight up until all that could be seen of him were his shoes and stockings. And I'm as short as can be, and he shrank down to the size of a pebble. I'm as generous as can be, he said, handing each of them a large red apple. And I'm as selfish as I can be, he snarled, grabbing them back. I'm as strong as can be, he said, lifting a great boulder over top of his head. And I'm as weak as can be, he said, staggering under the weight of just his hat. I'm as smart as can be, he remarked 12 different times in a different language each time. And I'm as stupid as can be, he admitted, putting both feet in one of his shoes. I'm as graceful as can be, he hummed, balancing on one toe. And I'm as clumsy as I can be, he said, sticking a thumb in his eye. I'm as fast as can be, he announced, running around the island twice in no time at all. And I'm as slow as can be, he complained, waving goodbye to a snail. Is that any help to you? Once again, the trio conferred in busy whispers until all three agreed.
It's really very simple,
said the humbug, twirling his cane.
Oh, well, if everything you say is true,
added Talk. Then, without a doubt, Milo concluded brightly, you must be, can be. Of course, yes, of course, the man shouted. Why didn't I think of that? I'm as happy as can be. And then he sat down quickly, put his head in his hands, and sighed. But I'm also as sad as can be.
Now, will you tell me where we are?
Asked Talk as he looked around the desolate island.
Ah, yes.
To be sure, said Canby. You're on the island of conclusions. Make yourself at home. You're apt to be here for some time. But how did we get here? Asked Milo, who was still a bit puzzled by being there at all. Well, you jumped, of course, explained Canby. That's the way almost everyone gets here. It's really quite simple. Every time you decide something without having a good reason, you jump to conclusions, whether you like it or not. It's such an easy trip to make that I've been here hundreds of times. But this is such an unpleasant-looking place, Milo remarked. Oh, yes, that's true, but it can be. It does look much better from a distance. As he spoke, at least 8 or 9 more people sailed onto the island from every direction possible. Well,
I'm going to jump right back,
announced the humbug, who took 2 or 3 practice bends, leapt as far as he could, and landed in a heap, about 2 feet away. Oh, that won't do at all, scolded Canby, helping him to his feet. You can never jump away from conclusions. Getting back is not so easy. That's why we're also so terribly crowded here. That was certainly the truth, for all around the bleak shore, clustered on the rocks, for as far as anyone could see, were enormous crowds of people, all sadly looking out to sea. Isn't there even a boat? Asked Milo, anxious to get on with his trip. Oh no, replied Canby, shaking his head. The only way back is to swim. That's a very long and a very hard way.
I don't like to get wet,
moaned the unhappy bug, and he shuddered at the thought. Neither do they, said Canby sadly. That's what keeps them here. But I wouldn't worry about it too much, for if you can swim all day in the Sea of Knowledge... Oh, but you can swim all day in the Sea of Knowledge and still come out completely dry. Most people do, but you must excuse me now. I have to go greet the new arrivals. As you know, I'm as friendly as can be. Over the humbug's strenuous objections, Milo and Talk decided to swim, and protesting loudly, they dragged the bug along with them toward the sea. Canby hurried off to answer more questions, and the last thing he was heard to say was, "Pardon me, can you tell me who I am?" They swam, and swam, and swam, for what seemed like hours, and only Talk's firm encouragement kept Milo struggling through the icy water. At last they reached the opposite shore, thoroughly exhausted, and except for the bug, completely soaked.
Well, that wasn't bad at all.
The humbug said, straightening his tie and brushing himself off. I must visit there again. I'm sure you will, gasped Milo, but from now on, I'm going to have a very good reason before I make up my mind about anything. You can lose too much time jumping to conclusions. The car was just where they had left it, and in a moment they were on their way again as the road turned away from the sea and began its long climb into the mountains. The warm sun and billowy breezes dried them out as they went. I hope we reach Digitopolis soon, said Milo, thinking of the breakfast they had not eaten. I wonder how far it is.